At the Silver Birch, elegance came easy, but kindness was rare. For Clara Weiss, a humble waitress carrying her family's burdens, every day was a test of endurance. That is, until the afternoon Victor Hahn, a ruthless billionaire, walked in. Confident and cold, Victor mocked Clara in German, believing she couldn't understand. But Clara did. And instead of breaking, she stood tall. With calm strength and flawless German, she reminded him that respect isn't bought, and wealth means nothing without humanity. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop your country in the comment below, and please like the video. Thank you. Now let's continue. The restaurant hummed softly with the gentle clatter of silverware, the low murmur of conversation, and the inviting scent of warm bread drifting through the air. Sunlight streamed through wide glass windows, scattering golden patterns across the crisp white tablecloths. It might have seemed like an ordinary afternoon, but for Clara Weiss, it felt like yet another quiet trial in a life that rarely offered rest. She smoothed her apron, wiped her trembling palms on the fabric, and put on a practiced smile as she walked toward a table that would soon alter the course of her life, and touch the lives of everyone around her. Clara had been working endless shifts at the Silver Birch, a polished restaurant where the rich came to boast about success and the staff were expected to blend into the background. Her mother's medical bills were growing faster than she could pay them, and her younger brother's school fees hung over her like a storm cloud. She never voiced her struggles, not even when her body ached or her vision blurred from fatigue. There was a calm strength in her, one that only people familiar with hardship tend to carry. That afternoon, a group of sharply dressed executives swept in, filling the space with laughter and the easy arrogance of men used to being obeyed. Leading them was Victor Hahn, a powerful financier with a reputation for being cold, calculating, and brutally direct. None of them knew that what began as a simple lunch would soon become a moment they'd never forget. A ripple of whispers spread through the restaurant the moment Victor Hahn settled into his seat. Power has a strange gravity. It pulls attention, silences laughter, and makes people shrink without realizing it. His smile was flawless, rehearsed even, but his eyes stayed cold, distant. Victor thrived on the weight of being noticed, respected, even feared. Clara Weiss noticed him too, but only because it was her job. She approached with a tray of drinks balanced in her hands, her posture straight, her steps careful. She could feel the men's gazes on her, not as a person, but as part of the setting, like a prop in their world of money and dominance. Victor leaned back comfortably, speaking in smooth, effortless German to the men beside him, confident that no one in the room could follow. His voice carried a smug rhythm as he made a cutting remark about the nervous waitress, and how awkward poor people always looked when they tried to seem elegant. His companions burst into laughter, sharp, mocking, and loud enough to make heads turn. Clara's chest tightened. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. Every word had landed like a sting, because she understood him perfectly. German had once been her language of dreams, the one she studied with passion when she hoped to become a translator. But those dreams had crumbled the year her father died, leaving her to shoulder the burden of survival alone. For a moment, she thought about walking away, pretending she hadn't heard. But something within her refused, something stronger than fear or humiliation. Quietly, she set the glasses on the table with perfect composure, drew a steady breath, and met Victor's gaze. Then, in clear, flawless German, she spoke, each word deliberate, calm, and laced with the quiet dignity of someone who had already lost everything except her pride. Clara looked straight at Victor and spoke with calm conviction. She told him that true respect isn't earned through money, and that wisdom doesn't come with power or privilege. She explained that the language he used to mock others was one she had once studied, not to impress anyone, but to understand people and build bridges between worlds. Her words cut through the air like a quiet revelation. The laughter at the table stopped instantly. The whole restaurant seemed to freeze, as if time itself had paused. Victor's confident grin vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion, something fragile and human. His business partners shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his eyes, their earlier bravado dissolving into uneasy silence. Clara didn't raise her voice or plead for sympathy. She simply spoke her truth and let it hang in the air. Then, with her head held high, she turned and walked away, leaving a man of immense power staring blankly at the reflection trembling in his wine glass. The rest of the meal passed in an uneasy quiet. Victor barely touched his food, and the men who had laughed moments before now whispered in awkward tones. Something in Clara's calm defiance had unsettled him more deeply than any insult could have. When the time came to pay, Victor surprised everyone by asking to see the manager. The staff exchanged worried glances. Everyone assumed the waitress was about to be reprimanded or even fired. Clara's heart sank as her name was called. She took a breath, preparing herself for humiliation. But when she approached the table, the man who stood up to face her wasn't the same arrogant figure from earlier. His expression had softened, stripped of pride. Switching between German and English, Victor apologized, not just to her, but to everyone who had witnessed his cruelty. The entire restaurant fell silent. No one could quite believe what they were seeing, a billionaire humbling himself before a waitress. He admitted that he had misjudged her, that in chasing power and success, he had forgotten what respect truly meant. Then, quietly, he left a generous tip, not as a way to buy forgiveness, but as a sincere gesture of gratitude, and walked out, his entourage following in silence. Clara didn't shed a tear, though her chest ached with emotion. Instead, she took a shaky breath and smiled faintly. She had stood her ground, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been belittled for being ordinary. Weeks passed, and life slipped back into routine. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived at the Silver Birch, addressed to Clara. Inside was a handwritten letter from Victor Hahn. He thanked her for the lesson she had unknowingly given him. He confessed that her courage had forced him to reflect on the man he had become, and the one he had once been. He revealed that he, too, had grown up with very little, but somewhere along the path to success, he had buried his compassion under layers of pride and ambition. Her words, he wrote, had reminded him of the values he had lost. Kindness, humility, and empathy ***, the things that once guided his journey before wealth dimmed his heart. Inside the envelope, Clara Weiss found something that left her speechless, a scholarship application and a sponsorship offer. Victor Hahn had created an educational fund in her name, dedicated to helping students from low-income families pursue their studies. He insisted that she be the first beneficiary. Clara stared at the papers in disbelief. Her hands trembled as tears blurred her vision. A few heartfelt words spoken in courage had not only restored her own sense of worth, but had awakened compassion in a man who had long forgotten what it meant to feel human. She accepted the offer without hesitation. With the scholarship's help, she returned to university, finishing the studies she had once been forced to abandon. In time, Clara achieved her dream, becoming a professional translator, turning her love for languages into a career that allowed her to connect people and stories across borders. Years later, she stood before a packed auditorium as a guest speaker at a university seminar on resilience and kindness. Looking out at the eager faces of students, she found herself transported back to that golden afternoon, the glint of sunlight on polished tables, the cruel laughter that had turned to silence, and the quiet strength that had changed everything. She told them that kindness is not a weakness, it is courage in its most graceful form. And sometimes, speaking the truth with calm and compassion can transform even the hardest hearts. That evening, as the sun dipped beyond the city skyline, its amber glow filtered through the restaurant's windows, spilling across empty tables. Clara stayed behind, cleaning up as usual, but this time, she felt different. Something inside her had shifted forever. She was no longer just a waitress. She was living proof that dignity has no price, that words can heal, and that one act of courage can ripple through another person's life like sunlight after a storm. And far away, in a towering office overlooking the city, Victor Hahn sat by the window, a letter with her name in his hands. He whispered a quiet, "Thank you," to the woman who had reminded him that wealth means nothing without compassion. If this story moved you and reminded you how powerful kindness can be, take a moment to like, share, and comment on the Voice of Kindness story. The world needs stories that remind us of hope and humanity. Before you go, think about this. If you were in Clara's place, would you have stayed quiet, or would you have found the strength to speak as she did?